Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Eden Road podcast. Just as the display goes right as we kick off, that's happened last time, it doesn't matter. Normal season done now, but we've got loads of content planned for the summer. So remember, please subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. Leave a rating as well and follow us on Twitter at the Eden Road. I have to apologise, I've had the worst hay fever this weekend. I don't know if any sufferers are feeling the same, but my asthma's just gone nuts, it's gone crazy. So if I sound a bit nasally and I'm trying to catch my breath, it's just because I've got hay fever. I'm not dying on the pod, don't worry. But yeah, on this week's episode, we'll be doing an end of season review. Delighted to be joined in the studio by Clayton. Clayton, all good, mate?
Yeah, good, but I sound better than you.
Yeah. And also delighted to be joined by Jay for a second time coming back on the pod, mate. Thanks for coming back on.
No, absolute pleasure.
How was the holiday? All good?
Yeah, really good. So yeah, for those that don't know, I've been out in Seville for the last week. Yeah, it's just good. Obviously, it's been a long season with the World Cup in it as well. So it's just nice to kind of recharge and then just get straight back into it.
Good stuff, mate. Good stuff. So just a couple of prelims before we get going. The first time we did this, we didn't actually open up questions to the audience because we kind of just wanted to keep it like a little bit under the wraps, just like do kind of a big reveal. We got Jay House. But this time we haven't. We've got a ton of questions to get through. So I thought we'd start with some of our own that we just come up with, and then we'll kind of move on to the listeners before getting onto the end of season awards, if that sounds good. So yeah, first of all, Jay, how's it been covering Brentford this year? Been fun?
Yeah, it's been really good. I think first year was my first year as a reporter, so I was obviously very excited, but I didn't really know what to expect. So obviously there's a lot of challenges that come with any new job. Whereas the second year, I feel like I'm obviously more, not way experienced as a reporter, but more experienced as a reporter. So I just kind of knew what the day in, day out work would look like. And then obviously it's just been another fantastic season. You know, I've been very privileged to join Brentford at like a great point in their journey. And I think at the beginning of this year, I was like, avoiding relegation again would be incredible, but let's see what happens. And when 2-0 down on the first day of the season after 46 minutes to Leicester City, I think Ben Mee made this quite an odd mistake to give the ball away. You're thinking, oh, this could this could be a long season. And then when Josh Da Silva equalised, I was like, actually, do you know what? Everything's going to be fine. It was just such a good moment. So yeah, it's been a great year.
Can you sort of like identify any kind of big differences between your first year covering, whether that be like on and off the pitch? I know we've kind of evolved in terms of how we played this season, especially against the Big Six. But in terms of off the pitch, like any changes in the press boxes, anything like that, just to become a little bit more Premier League sort of ready or anything?
Well, obviously the training ground would be one. Yeah. The old media room at the training ground was basically a tent, and every time a plane went past, it was going to Heathrow. Thomas Frank would stop his answer, then he'd have to restart it. Then he'd forget. If it was really windy or really rainy, you wouldn't be able to hear anything. And obviously that's just a massive part of the club's evolution. First it was a stadium, now it's a training ground. I've been given a tour of the training ground, and the facilities look really great. I don't think they're too flashy. One of my colleagues who covers Leicester City obviously has written a report about what kind of happened with them this season, and kind of one of the criticisms within it is that their training ground's almost too nice. It's almost like a 5-star hotel, and the players are almost pampered. And I think Brentford's training ground, from what I've seen, has the right balance of, it having the necessary and plush facilities for a Premier League footballer who's on a lot of money each week, but not treating them as if they're royalty. So that's been really good. And then you kind of mentioned it on the pitch, can definitely see how the club are trying to be a little bit more positive in games against the Big Six and trying to control the ball a little bit more. And I actually think Aaron Hickey's been quite central to that, because you will see he's very confident at taking players on from right back. And so I'm really intrigued to see how he develops, because I think he's been a big part of the club moving forward when he has played.
Well, yeah, we've kind of talked about Aaron Hickey before, sort of towards, I don't know, there was a kind of point at the midway season when he wasn't kicking on as much as we hoped he would after the first few games, and then in the latter end of the season I thought it was phenomenal. We've kind of spoke about it
on the run-in. I thought it was very good.
Are there any truth behind those Man City rumours that kind of went around sort of halfway through?
I've not heard anything about Man City, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, because he's 20 years old, and he's already played 21. He's 21 years old. He's already got experience in Serie A in the Premier League. He must have played probably 25 Premier League appearances, and didn't look out of place. So it might break Brentford hearts, but I'm sure there are other clubs that play in the Champions League and the Europa League that are probably looking at him. But I'm sure he knows that the best thing for his development would probably be to stay at Brentford for the time being.
Yeah, for the foreseeable at least. I think you kind of mentioned at the start sort of what your expectations were before the season. It'd be nice to stay in the Premier League, but obviously after that first game, it was looking like it could be a sort of relegation battle after. But we ended up getting the equaliser with Josh Da Silva. So I guess what my question was is like, how much did your pre-season expectations differ from how we actually did? Was it just over and above out of this world? Or
it's honestly hard to remember. I think I just felt like loads of people were coming up to me saying, friends, colleagues, just banging on about second season syndrome. And obviously, if any club was going to be the exception to that rule, it was going to be Brentford. And to be honest, second syndrome, there is a little bit of a myth to it. It's quite an easy narrative. But then obviously people were going on about, Brentford aren't going to do anything without Christian Eriksen. Tony's not even that good. And I just thought, well, you know what? The club's made some really intelligent signings. Obviously, Ben Mee came in, more experience. David Raya was going to be available the whole season. And I always told people, yes, Eriksen coming to Brentford was important, but actually the dip kind of started when David Raya was out injured. Yeah. And the form kind of kicks in when he comes back. Obviously, at the time, I thought Keane Lewis-Potter would contribute, and he's had a tricky season with injuries. Thought Damsgaard would maybe contribute a little bit more. But I just felt quite positive. No one left. When you keep your Norgards, your Pinnocks, your Tonys, your Mbumos, players who were already performing at a very good level in the Premier League, but most of them were 23, 24, 25, 26, whatever it is, still young, can still only get to a higher level. I felt like there's no reason why Brentford can't finish in and around 12th, 13th again. And maybe if results went their way, get in the top half. But I'm not too sure if I genuinely thought top half was on the table, especially when you look at some of the money clubs spend in this division.
When we go on that insane unbeaten run halfway through the season, it starts with it started actually with the Forest. Was it Forest?
It was Forest.
Forest away.
I always think it's the Man City game. I always have to go back and double check.
I was just about to say that
because it felt like a loss.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, when we went on that incredible run, was there ever a moment where you felt like, okay, European dreams they're on?
Not really. I kind of told myself if Brentford are still in the hunt with 10 or 8 games to go, then I'd start to take it a little bit seriously. Like if go back and read my copy, I don't really mention Europe that much. I was trying to just, I'm very much one of those people who I don't want to get gassed about something until it's actually happened. So deep down inside, I was probably like, come on. But I was like, I didn't want to get too carried away. And then I think the Newcastle loss and the Aston Villa draw fell exactly around that 9 games left period. And obviously they were teams who, Aston Villa in particular, Brentford were kind of competing against at that point. I think Brentford ahead of Villa at the time. I think they might have been, or maybe just a couple of points behind. So I felt like they're the games where
that you need to win.
Brentford played very well in both those games, but only got 1 point. Yeah. I felt like if you're going to get Europe, you need to get 4 points out of those games minimum. So for me, from that point onwards, I thought it's probably not going to happen. Yeah,
I think quite a lot's been made, especially with how well Brighton have done this season. And, whether they'll be able to maintain that next year, I don't know. But there's a lot being made of how difficult it is for teams outside the Big Six to kind of break into that top 6 mould. Is a place in Europe a realistic target for next season? Would you say for a team like Brentford or Brighton?
It's so hard to tell because you basically have to rely on one of the Big Six and now Newcastle on having a really bad season. And then even outside of those 7 teams, West Ham have just won the Europa Conference League. Even though they didn't have a good season domestically, they're still a good team. They've still invested a lot of money in that team. Same with Leicester City before all went wrong. Same with Aston Villa now. So as harsh as it is for Brentford and Brighton to get into the top 7 and sneak into Europe, you kind of need 2 or 3 teams to have really, really bad seasons. And you're always going to get one team have a bad season or do worse than expected from that top rank in the clubs. But to get 2 or 3 do it to the extent they did this season, I think is really rare. Surely Chelsea aren't going to finish bottom half again.
You can't really I think I'm right in saying there's 8 next season. There'll be 8 places going in Europe because they're reformatting all the European competitions, and because West Ham will automatically already be in it. Yeah. Although that won't affect it next year. But
for 2024-25.
24-25 is when they're starting the big league format, whatever you think about that.
That's it. The European tour is next year then.
When I was watching that West Ham game, I was at the pub with in Stratford, so with a load of West Ham fans. I couldn't help but think, oh my God, it would have been so fun to do this.
That's the fever dream, right? That's the fever dream. That's as about as good as it gets.
It would have been unreal, but obviously we didn't quite get there in the end. It's a good season then. Overall, better than the last season, you would say? More fun doing it.
Definitely. Look, the first year round was just so, I think I said it on the pod when I was last time here, it was like a childhood dream that I achieved it. That opening game against Arsenal, was just incredible. So second year round was a little bit different, but I think, the 4-0 versus Man United, that just felt like that is why we all watch football. That's why we all follow teams, right? Like baking hot Saturday afternoon in August. You know, you're thinking, what on earth is going on? You know, Brentford upsetting a team that, you know, at the time had Ronaldo, Rashford. I think it was Lisandro Martinez's first start or second start for Man United. And you're just thinking, like, this is what the magic of football's all about. So there are moments like that, City at Man City at the Etihad as well, which, I don't know, it's hard to compare. Because the 4-1 at Stamford Bridge, for example, was a really good memory. I don't know, it's difficult to say.
I think that we've spoken about it before, like this season in terms of the moments, there's just been so many that you live for as a fan outside of the top 6.
Yeah, you're very spoiled.
Yeah.
Just to touch on something you said earlier, you obviously, compared to last season, you sprinkled in the World Cup this year as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
Well, last year. But, I mean, you said it at the start. Does it feel like it was this season? To me, it feels like a million miles ago, like that Argentina lifted that trophy in what, December? Kind of, it just feels so long ago.
That doesn't feel that far ago to me, because I think until I went on holiday to Seville, I could still feel the fatigue. And I think just it was such a crazy 3 weeks I had out there that obviously still think about it quite a lot. Like while I was in Seville, I had a Moroccan waiter, and so obviously just showed him a couple of photos and stuff. So it naturally comes up in conversation. I think there are games before the World Cup, and I always reference the like 0-0 draw with Chelsea that I'm like, I just can't even remember that happening. There are games before the World Cup. I'm just like, what galaxy did that happen in? Let alone what year. But no, the World Cup still feels close-ish, but I do get what you mean.
Yeah, I think for a fan, maybe it feels a bit longer, something's happened between, but someone like yourself that's had such a profound experience at the World Cup, it's cool to think that even though that's 6 months ago, it's still kind of in the forefront of your memory.
Well, the final was on the 18th, Sunday the 18th. Flew back December the 19th, and then I was at Brentford, Tottenham on Boxing Day, and then I took the West Ham game off. So it was like 1 minute I was writing about, you know, Mbappe, and the next minute I was writing about, you know, Højbjerg scoring it wasn't a late equaliser, but a late equaliser. So I've gone from Premier League to the World Cup final.
Even that game,
like
I'm struggling to remember.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it does feel like a while ago.
Wasn't it like a really early kickoff?
We were 12:30 kickoff.
The first game,
Yeah.
No, there's a few that just kind of get lost in memory, especially from before the World Cup. There's a couple of things that I kind of wanted to talk about just before we head on to the questions from our audience. The Canos situation, I just think what can you give us a bit of a lowdown on that? Because when I saw the announcement that we're going to extend his contract, what's the thinking? Is he going to feature, or is it going to be just more the weekend?
My instinct is that I understand from Sergi's perspective, especially because he put out that message in January when he went out on loan on Olympiacos. It very much felt like it was the end.
Yeah.
But look, in football clubs are always trying to make money, and at the end of the day, Brentford always had that 1 year option, and Sergi did pretty well out on loan on Olympiacos. Okay, he had a bit of an injury, but it seemed like he rediscovered a bit of form, scored a few goals, got a few assists. I think he even said himself he felt like he was enjoying football again. And so I think from Brentford's perspective, it's like, it sounds harsh, but okay, we could let him go for free, but he's played well enough that a club might come in this summer and offer us £4 million for him, and you know, we need to consider wages, we need to consider the money we're going to spend on transfers this summer. So I think it's just a pragmatic decision, but I understand, especially for the fans who feel like if there was any player the club should have, you know, let go in that type of situation and said, you know what, you've given us, you know, 6-7 years of fantastic service. You deserve to decide which club you go to next with all the freedom of the world. It would have been Sergi. So I get why some people felt like that wasn't the wisest move from the club.
Yeah. I think the Twitter reaction was very much a mixed bag. I don't know. I think maybe it just depends on kind of what signings we make over the summer in those wing positions, but we're pretty covered at the moment, I would say. I don't know if there's a scope for him to feature.
I can't see him. I very much think he'll leave this summer. I can't see him hanging around. Maybe I'm wrong, but obviously at the moment, like you said, out wide you've got Tony's ban complicates it slightly, but you've got Visser, you've got Mbumo, you've got Kevin Schade, Keane Lewis Potter, Damsgaard, De Silva can play there as well, and Thomas Franks mentioned that they're all going to be starting ahead of Sergi. And look, Sergi's always been an emotional guy, but he did make a few not very subtle comments on social media and things like that.
That rubs some fans up the wrong way.
Not just fans, but I'm sure maybe not members of the coaching staff, but I'm sure Thomas Frank would have looked at that and gone, common surgery a little bit better than that. Maybe I'm wrong. And I'm sure it's nothing they wouldn't be able to sort out, but it's just things like that almost add to the feeling that this journey's ended. It was beautiful. It's time to go.
Yeah. Bit of news broke as well. I have to say that we were kind of talking about it off air with the whole David Raya situation, not really moved forward from when the first kind of talk happened, because it's kind of looking like we've set a price tag at 40 million. Tottenham aren't willing to reach that price tag. Could you just give us a little bit of an update on that?
Yeah, so first day back from holiday and I'm straight into the mix, especially after.
Sorry, mate.
No. Especially after Fabrizio Romano's been tweeting about it. Look, I don't think the situation's changed at all from a Brentford perspective. They want at least £40 million for him. I understand there are a lot of people looking from the outside saying, well, he's only got a year left on his contract. He's rejected 2 contracts. He's publicly said he wants to leave. That valuation makes no sense, which I get. But I think from Brentford's perspective, okay, we sold Watkins and Benrahma for £25 million. And that was when they were championship players. Raya, just look at Raya's stats. He is one of the top 3, top 5 goalkeepers in the Premier League. Yeah. He's a Spain international. Whether he's got a year left on his contract or not, you've got to pay a premium. So I think no club can really seriously talk about getting Raya on a cut price fee. You're going to have to offer Brentford a club record sale. So that's what, 30 million plus. So 40 million. From what I understand, lots of talk about Tottenham being interested in Raya and having discussions. But as far as I understand, Tottenham haven't approached Brentford directly. So It's all well and good that they might be in negotiations with his camp, and that happens quite a lot in football. But from what I understand, there's not been an official approach yet. So I think this is going to be something that's going to drag on for a long, long time. I know there are other clubs interested in Raya as well. And again, that helps Brentford. Why are they going to say, oh, you have him for £20 million? If there are 3 or 4 clubs at the table, they're probably thinking, maybe this can go higher than 40 million. Maybe not. But yeah, like I said, I think it's something that's going to rumble on for a long time. So be prepared for a proper summer saga, shall we say.
Could you see a scenario in which he doesn't leave and he does not play for Brentford for a season?
I can see a scenario where he doesn't leave. I think at the moment, the only reason I don't think that will happen is because, what are we, the 10th, 11th of June or whatever it is, and you've already got a lot of clubs showing interest in him. So I think that's a good sign, if good is the right way of putting it, that he's not going to be at Brentford next season. If we were getting to August and no clubs had come in for him whatsoever, I'd be thinking, there might have to be a change of stance here. So if things didn't work out and he ended up staying at Brentford, I could see that being a possibility, because I think from the club's perspective, if they want £40 million and clubs are saying, right, we're only going to offer you 20 or £25 million, I think Brentford would weigh up whether it's worth letting a player of that quality go at that price, what kind of message that sends out to other teams. And at the end of the day, as far as I'm aware, there's no friction between Raya and the club. It's just very much, I feel like I've come to the natural end of my journey at Brentford. I want to play in the Champions League. I respect that as a journalist. It's like any walk of life. Sometimes we just want to go on to bigger and better things, but I get with football, it's a difficult thing to comprehend. Having said that, if Brentford are stuck with Raya on the opening day of the season, I'm sure Thomas Frank's going to go, well, this isn't a bad situation at all. I've got one of the best goalkeepers in the league. He's just helped us finish 9th. I'm sure all the other key players are going to stay. Norgard and Bumo, they're all on long-term contracts. Pinnock as well, Rico Henry. I'm keeping the nucleus of a really good team here. Maybe in an alternate universe, this summer you lose Raya and Tony, and now there's a scenario where you might keep both. I don't think Thomas Frank and any of the coaching staff would look at that and be disappointed by that outcome. Unexpected, but
does the signing of Flecken already, does that not indicate, I mean, surely he's been told he's going to be the starter, so if Raya's still there come August, does he kind of go, well, I don't really understand what's going on here? Yeah,
of course, if you're Flecken, you're probably looking at it as, I'm coming in and I've probably been given certain assurances, but then at the same time, Thomas Strakosha's already here as a backup and he's hardly played, I think he's played 2 or 3 times. So Flecken's probably also knows, just because I'm coming in and it looks like there's a vacancy doesn't mean I'm going to be giving it straight away. No. Because if Thomas Strakosha has an amazing pre-season, who's to say that he starts as the number 1 next season? Exactly. We're all assuming it's Flecken, and I completely get that because he's the one that's coming for money. Yeah. But we're forgetting that Strakosha had a really good reputation at Lazio. It's only because he's been struggling with so many injuries over the last year, and Raya's been so phenomenal that we've not seen him at all. Yeah. So it would be a complex situation if you've got Strakosha, Raya and Flecken at the club next season, but at the same time it's kind of a good position to be in. You'd rather have too many goalkeepers on the first day of the season, or when the window ends, than not have enough and be scrambling around.
Yeah, because you've got Matthew Cox as well, right? And he's just gone to the Euros
prospect,
Euros or World Cup for England.
England under Euro under 20s, and he's really highly rated by the club. I just think it's a little too soon for him to be the definitive number 2.
Definitely.
He's so good.
But he hasn't had a loan out yet, has he? So maybe this will be the summer for it. Get some first team experience.
It wouldn't surprise me. I've definitely noticed that anytime the B team have a big game, so like on their run to the Premier League Cup, second it gets to the quarter, semi-finals, final, Matthew Cox normally plays. And then if you look at a lot of Brentford's first team's games behind closed doors, when they just play random teams for fitness, he will often start in those as well. And I think it's almost like, we don't need to play David Raya in these games against Luton Town 11 on a Tuesday, but Matthew Cox will benefit from that. So I've noticed they do that with him a lot as well.
Just I wanted to talk a little bit about Ivan before we get into the questions, but just from a fan's perspective, any animosity towards David Raya whatsoever if he goes to Tottenham, who don't have Champions League football or European football?
I've seen it.
I've seen it.
I've seen a few things. Jason Love kind of says it all right.
I've seen a few things on Twitter saying it's a bit of a sideways move.
Yes, they don't have European football this year, but they were in a Champions League final 4 years ago.
Exactly.
So
they will also offer him loads more money than Brentford will. Raya will go to Tottenham and maybe be in the middle order of their top earners, whereas he'd be probably the top earner if he stayed at Brentford, or one of the top 3 earners at Brentford. Do you get what I mean? So it's, from a financial perspective, it's a bit of a no-brainer.
Okay. Who's more likely to play in Europe next season? Unfortunately, Spurs. Whose stadium's far?
I only brought it up because I just seen some stuff on Twitter. That's why I just wanted to bring it up. We should talk about Ivan. Obviously, I think the first thing to say is that it's created a hell of a lot more work for you during the season. This whole kind of thing that's just like landed and been an ongoing thing for like 8 months. There's been some interviews. He's come out and he said a few things, not really anything of note. But I kind of think we should touch on as particular, unless you think there is. With what he said, he did an interview with Craig Mitch, and he's talking about how he's thought the way it's been done by the FA has been a little bit spiteful in his words.
The most insightful thing I got out of that was that he was alluding to the fact that when the first league came out, that they were talking about banning him from then, and then kind of switched and decided to do it at the end of the season. I thought that was the main bit of information I got out of that I didn't know before.
I also think what he said that was quite pertinent as well. He said that the most gutting thing about it was missing the World Cup, as opposed he knows he's banned from football for 8 months, but it was more devastating to miss out on the chance to go to the World Cup, which I thought was quite maybe a little bit of an insight into his character. But what just the whole Ivan Toney saga, just like what's it been like for you as a reporter covering it?
Yeah, it's been so obviously. I can just vividly remember when the leaks first came out. It was right after the Nottingham Forest game. And I was on the coach on the way home, and I don't know if I noticed it first or I heard a few whispers from other Brentford fans on the coach, and I suddenly looked at my phone and obviously made a few phone calls to the bosses, etc., and thought, well, we've got a big story on our hands here. It's obviously been a really confusing situation because I've been really conscious of the fact that I think there's been a hell of a lot of speculation from other media outlets throughout this whole process, and I've been really conscious about the fact that, one, that's not how I want to be perceived as a journalist, and two, I think as the Brentford reporter for The Athletic, I recognise that, I don't know, if I put something out there, I think a lot of people will believe it, and with this situation there were just too many uncertainties, there were too many questions, there were too many unknowns. I was like, do you know what, the second I know something for certain, I'll report it. I'm not going to start talking about what ifs or intangibles or whispers and rumours, because I don't think it helps anybody long term. So it's been quite a difficult situation in that regard to kind of hold your tongue when you're hearing bits and pieces, but you don't know how true they are. I've obviously written quite extensively about the issue with gambling in football, and there's definitely a culture that needs to be looked at, and gambling sponsorship, etc., etc., etc. I think. Obviously, I do feel for Ivan Toney, because especially with the fact that he's banned from training for 4 months, and I've tried to find out a little bit more about what being banned from football activity means, and it is very vague. From what I understand, the club are able to communicate with him and basically give him some sort of rehab plan and fitness plan, because obviously when he was banned, he did have a hamstring injury. So, you know, I almost had this image of him. Is he just stuck at home, like you know, rubbing deep heat or something like that into his hamstring because he can't go to the training ground? But I think bits and pieces like that, Brentford are able to kind of work with him and ask for guidance from the FA. But then at the same time, he has made I think it's fair to say he has made some silly decisions. Obviously, addiction's a very complicated thing, and so it's good that as part of the written reasons which came out that he's going to, you know, receive counselling and therapy. And to a degree, I get his point about the fact that he feels that there was a little bit of a shift in direction with the investigation. But this was a really complicated investigation, and I think he needs to remember, originally he lied. Yeah. So when he first spoke to the FA, he said, I don't bet on football. And then I think it took until February. So I'm trying to remember the dates. Sorry, it's so complicated. I think the FA originally contacted him last May. So in total, it was at least a 12-month process. So is first interviewed by them in July, and he denies he bets on football. Then they interview him again in October, and I think he denies he bets on football again then, and it takes until February for him to admit it. So he can talk about feeling like the investigation maybe was not done in the perfect way, but he had multiple opportunities to admit it. And look, if I get why in those moments, maybe he was very scared about the consequences. You know, he's just been banned for 8 months, and that's why he lied. But you can't get away from the fact that he did not pervert the court of justice. This isn't a criminal offence, but he shielded the truth from the FA.
Yeah. Could be more honest.
So of course, and maybe that would have mitigated the length of the ban. But on the other side of it, at least he did then come out and admit all the charges, and it seems like, you know, he handed over his phone, he handed over his bank statements, and he was cooperative in the end. So I think he just needs to bear that in mind. But football obviously has a lot of lessons to learn from it. Ivan Toney has a lot of lessons to learn from it. I think what a lot of people would quite like to see is maybe the Premier League, the FA, and Brentford and Ivan Toney almost collaborating on something where he's going into clubs or he's going into universities or whatever it is and talking quite openly about what he's experienced. But I've never had a gambling addiction. I don't know how hard it is to go and talk about that. But I think that is probably the best outcome for everybody, having Ivan Toney not be a cautionary tale for young players and young footballers, but almost as a bit of a role model to say, I've experienced this. This is how you can move on away from it. I think that's the best outcome for everyone.
I think on the interview as well, he said something about, you know, people want to. I think Craig Mitch wanted to get out of him some bits that he said it wasn't suitable to talk about at the time, and he said, as long as I get my point across, I don't care what platform it goes out on. So Ivan, if you're listening, mate, Idiom Road Podcast will have you for Ivan's Tell All.
No, The Athletic will have you. Right? Joint venture.
But yeah, we'll move on to the questions. Obviously, we could talk about the Tony stuff for hours, and such is the nature of that whole kind of issue. You did a great podcast on The Athletic. I'd advise anyone to go check that out, by the way, because it was
much appreciated.
With Stephen Corker.
Stephen Corker.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Well. No, it was really good. Really enjoyed it.
Which co-host do you prefer?
Cool. So we're going to discuss questions tweeted on the Twitter profile, as well as the Griffin Park Grapevine. So Stevie on the Griffin Park Grapevine asks, what are your impressions of what the club are hoping for in terms of ins and outs in the summer?
I personally don't think there'll be too much activity in terms of ins. That might be a controversial take, but I just think you look at the players that the club signed last summer, and apart from Hickey and Ben Mee, no one really had that much of a impact on the first team. I'm obviously thinking about Mikkel Damsgaard and Keane Lewis Potter in particular, but they're both 22, 23. And so I think the club will be looking at that saying, you know, we've invested a lot of money in these players last summer, and for various different reasons, injuries, loss of form, etc. They've not, you know, got the goals and assists they might have wanted, but we back them, we believe in them. They're going to have a pre-season, they're going to recover from injury, they've got more time to adjust to Thomas Frank's demands, adjust to their teammates, in Damsgaard's case, adjust to a new country. And so I think they'll be looking at that saying, do we need to go out and spend heavily in the attacking areas? Okay, Tony's out, but there's other solutions we can do. So I think they'll do what Brentford always do, where they look at players who are under the age of 23, who have, you know, really high ceilings, whether that's, you know, centre-back, midfield or striker, etc. And if there's any exciting opportunities that jump out like that, then I think they'll go for it. But otherwise, I don't think there's a need to go on a mad shopping spree. It was very different, whereas last summer everybody felt like we need to get a backup fullback. Need to get a little bit of extra creativity in central midfield. But I actually think the squad's in a pretty good place. I'd say that centre-back cover's probably the one area that jumps out at the moment. Obviously, Ethan Pinnock and Ben Mee have been phenomenal. Sad that Pontus Jansson's left. It's great that Zanka's sticking around. And Aya, we all know Aya has the potential to be a really, really great defender, but I just think in his 2 years at the club, he can't be relied upon because of injury. Until he proves otherwise, you need an extra body in there.
Do you think a number 9 in the summer is likely, or do you think Sharda and Wissa and Mbeumo have got that kind of?
I wouldn't rule it out. But I don't think Brentford are going to go out and sign like a 26, 25, 27-year-old striker.
It would be one in the similar mould.
Yeah, exactly that. And Mbeumo really did step up those final couple of games of the season. And if he can kind of, perform that way consistently in terms of his goal scoring output over the course of a 38-game season, then Brentford will be absolutely fine. Vissa does always step in. And also that Tottenham game in particular, I really did see a different side of Vissa. I've definitely been...
He slated him all game.
I've definitely been critical in the past. And to be honest, Thomas Frank's come out and said it as well, that he needs to be better off the ball. But I really felt like he really stepped up a notch that game. So again, if he can do that consistently over the course of a season... Look, we all know Kevin Sharda's ridiculously talented. He will score a goal one day. Yeah. So I think it would just be a case of, is there a young player out there who we can get, who we think is going to be really, really talented? Maybe other clubs aren't really looking at him right now. But I certainly don't think Brentford are going to go out and sign a direct replacement for Tony in that regard.
Cool. Thoughts on Ethan Brearley that we signed from Rochdale? I wasn't even in the running order, but I was just curious because I just don't, because obviously he was playing sort of league football for Rochdale throughout the season, widely regarded as one of their better players. I don't know, what would be your thoughts on kind of being a young player in that position, moving to the Brentford B setup and maybe not getting that kind of professional exposure as much as you would if you'd have stayed at Rochdale in the lower leagues? Sorry,
it's the pathway, isn't it? They'll just go, this is Josh De Silva. Yeah. Josh De Silva could have played for XYZ club in the Championship. Yeah. We took him into the B team for a year and look where he is now. Yeah. That's their pitch, right?
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, he will get very good experiences with the B team.
Yeah.
We've seen that. Just a wide variety of clubs they play. So it's not like a normal, we know for a fact it's not like a normal academy in that regard or a normal reserves team. And I think what maybe people, or maybe what fans don't realise that much, is that a lot of the best talents in the B team will train with the first team probably 3 times a week. And then in the lead up to a game, maybe the day before, they'll drop down into the B team and train with them. So you're looking at people like Ryan Trevitt, Matthew Cox, I'm sure Alex Gilbert as well, Paris Magoma, all those players, the top names in the B team over the last couple of years or so, Nathan Young-Coombs, will train with the first team probably the vast majority of the time. So they're still getting exposed to, maybe not in a match setting, but they're still working with some of the best players in the country. Do you know what I mean? In some cases in the world. So I still think for a young player like that, it would still be a really good experience for him.
He's a good speaker as well. I liked his interview as well.
I think they set out a plan, right? There's a 2, 3, 4 year plan for you. Whereas if you go to another team, maybe in the Premier League, and you're putting their under 21s or you're on the fringe of their first team, you kind of got to wait for that chance to break into the first team. Maybe not so defined. So yeah, I thought it was great to see someone. I think he had a move with another club fall through in January, and us to kind of pick it back on the summer. Happy to see that business getting done.
And we got another question from Stevie asking, how disappointed were people around the club to miss out on Europe?
Honestly, don't think massively. Obviously, it would have been an amazing achievement, but I don't think people internally expected Brentford to be in with a chance of your hay fever kicking in.
I tried
to be subtle about it. I don't think there were any tears on the final day of the season that, we missed out on Europe. What a crisis. I think it was, wow, like we really pushed these teams all the way. Like we only finished, a point behind Tottenham, Aston Villa. Yes, they started the season poorly, but you actually look at the players within that team. Ollie Watkins, Emi Buendia, Philippe Coutinho, Boubacar Kamara, like Diego Carlos, even their team's worth 3, 4, 5 times the amount of Brentford. So to even be in with a shout of getting into Europe, finishing above Chelsea, who've spent £500 million on players, I'm sure it would have been a bit gutting. but they would have taken a step back and said, actually, the achievements this club has made over the last year, 2 years, it's absolutely phenomenal. I remember someone told me the day Chelsea won the Champions League 2 years ago was the day Brentford got promoted. And 2 years later, Brentford have finished above them.
No, because that's not one of the only Champions Leagues in recent history that I never watched because I was at the playoff final.
You didn't miss much. It wasn't a great game, so don't worry about it.
Speaking of money, we got a question from the same guy again. He says, "What would you say roughly is the upper limit of wages we would pay for a player?"
I think
that's a good question.
I think at this point in time in the club's development, you're probably looking at 50, 60, 70 max, I'd say. And I think it's very important that the club grow organically. Because the second you start paying players 100k, 120k, if you give that to one player, everybody else in the team would, as you rightly would, if one of your closest colleagues at work suddenly got a pay bump, then you'd be saying, well, hang on a second, I want the exact same. So I think it's really conscious, and I'm sure Brentford have been offered players who, probably on surface would massively improve the squad, but if the wages don't work out, they'd happily take a step back. So I'd probably say you're looking at those figures at the moment.
We got Leonardo saying, do you think missing out on a European campaign may have actually been a blessing in disguise, seeing with how West Ham struggled with their sort of form in the Premier League, flirting with relegation periodically throughout the season? Do you think it could have gone the same way? Maybe
I'll flip it and I'll ask you guys a question. Would you take the risk of getting relegated next season
for that West Ham night?
You wouldn't be guaranteed that. You wouldn't be guaranteed that. You wouldn't be guaranteed that night.
Just for the campaign.
But for at least 6 games, in the group stage. 3 away, 3 at home.
I think so.
There you go then. This is an incredible chapter in the club's history, and I think Europe would only be, the cherry on top of that. When people, God forbid it doesn't happen, but if Brentford get relegated in 5-10 years' time, which often happens to teams of this size, your Leicester Cities, your Stokes, your Southamptons, your Burnleys, if you've kind of got those memories to hold on to, I'm sure, you just grit through those difficult times a little bit more. Do you remember that time we finished 10th? Or, do you remember that time where we got relegated? But we did end up in Europe for a season. I'm sure it kind of counterbalances.
Leicester fans, do you remember that time we won the league?
Yeah, exactly. But also, Leicester, didn't they get to the quarterfinals of the Champions League? Yeah. They're probably like, exactly. We had a good run.
Yeah. Exactly.
Same guy again, he's asked what the situation is about goalies. We've kind of touched on it already, but obviously he says Flecken's brought in to be number one choice. We've also got Strakosha, who was, came with this massive reputation from Lazio. Balcom, who's kind of been at the club for ages, but you think he's no good. And also
I didn't say he's no good.
I brought it up on a podcast because we were talking about goalkeepers, and I said, what about Balcom? He's still at the club. And Jordan, you and Jordan were both like...
He's been around for too long. He would have been in the first team by now.
But I thought he was in England.
He was at some point, yes.
Yeah, in England.
He's at Bristol Rovers. That's just gone, but he's on like 6-month loans for the last couple of years.
Yeah, he's one of those players who's had a slightly strange development because I think he was at a League One team at one point. Then his next loan was a League Two side, Crawley Town last year, I think it was. And then he's gone back to League One with Bristol Rovers this year. So he's kind of had to drop down to go up. Yes, he has been around at the club for a very, very long time, but he is still quite young for a goalkeeper. But having said that, as you guys have pointed out, you've got Flecken, Strakosha, possibly Raya still at the club next season, definitely Matthew Cox. If you're Ellery Balcom, you're probably looking at it thinking, if I want my career to progress in a direction, I probably need to take a step somewhere else and leave.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think Wibbs has got a question saying, as a non-Bees fan, what surprised you about the club since you became the Athletics correspondent?
Who said I wasn't a Brentford fan?
And he said, what preconceived ideas did you have?
What preconceived ideas did I have? I didn't really have like a massive opinion on Brentford. I just obviously heard a lot about the Moneyball thing, and obviously, not really allowed to say Moneyball anymore. So I knew it was gonna be an interesting club, and I knew that they were going to be run a little bit differently. But I don't think I really came in with any preconceived notions. No disrespect to Brentford. But obviously, a lot of the time, I'm 28. So when I'm watching Match of the Day when I'm 10, 11 years old, Brentford are in League One, League Two. And again, that's not intended as a disrespect. Just wasn't really aware of the club that much. And then when, it's the Josh Da Silva, Neil Maupay, Ben Rama Ollie Watkins era, definitely became a bit more aware of them, and was aware of Thomas Frank as well, but didn't really have any grand opinion. Sorry to disappoint.
Any surprises since his first question? As a non-Bees fan, what's surprised you about the club since you became the Athletics?
I think what maybe not surprises me. I think what impresses me the most is that everything is so consistent at the club. And I think when you're in the Brentford bubble, whether you're a fan, whether you're a journalist, whether you work at the club, you maybe take that a little bit for granted. But obviously I speak to my colleagues all the time, and I hear about things that happen at their club and what goes on behind the scenes. And I just think I've not really experienced any of that with Brentford. Maybe it's all going on and I just don't know. But it just seems that from top to bottom, there really is such a well thought out and a clear plan. And I just think that's so unbelievably rare in football. You see so many knee-jerk decisions, but it just seems like time and time again, Brentford really are so methodical. And I just think that when you've supported Brentford for 10, 15 years, when you've been covering the club for 3, 4, 5 years, when you've been playing for the club for 3, 4, 5 years, you almost just think that's the norm. Whereas actually the rest of the football world, it's like a washing machine. It's just like constantly like all over the place, constantly on a mad spin cycle. Whereas Brentford just seems to be not laid back, but just quite calm, quite assured in the things they do on a day-to-day basis.
It's especially impressive when you kind of look back even 20 years ago, how badly at points the club was run. The kind of contrast where it is now, kind of stuff that happened with finances, especially over the last few decades, to be in the place now, it's very impressive.
I think a lot of other clubs, especially in English football, well, probably not just in English football, around the world, probably sack Thomas Frank when he loses that Championship Player Final, because automatic promotion was close, and then it's not worked out in the Championship Player Final. And I think a lot of clubs would say, you know what, it's one thing to miss out on automatic promotion, especially when it was in your hands in the final 2 games of the season, and then to go and lose in that manner in the Player Final as well. Do you know what, you've taken us as far as you can. And obviously it seems like a really smart decision, and it was the right decision to stick with him. But I think there would have been a lot of clubs out there that would have gone, nah.
You just get another one of those big name Championship managers that does it for everyone.
Neil Warnock could have taken over,
but I don't even remember anyone calling for that. I don't even remember having a personal. When we lost against Fulham, I don't remember having any sort of thought about.
There was more Frank outcries when we went when we lost like 9 of our opening.
Yeah, that's what I thought Jay was going to say.
No. When Frank first took over, there was a little bit, but it was very much a minority of people saying
8 of his first
10 or something like that.
2016, 2017.
And also when he was at Brøndby, I think he went on a very similar run where it was like 9 of his first 12 or something like that. So maybe that's just, if he ever leaves Brentford in the future and, takes over at another club, don't be surprised if he loses like 10 of his first 14.
Well, they're saying the same thing about the new Spurs manager, right? And they're saying it's going to take a while. It's like, don't expect results first half of the season.
That's why I don't get with veering into not talking about Brentford, but I don't get it with the big six. Like, if Postecoglou comes in and he loses his first 10 games, or he goes on like a terrible run, they're not going to give him the time. I think they
will this time. I think they have to.
Yeah, but they say that,
But he's not a big, sexy name, is he?
No, he's not. He's not, but I don't know. It's weird. It kind of leads into the next question quite nicely. It says, realistically, due to the financial limitations, do you think we've reached a limit of how far we can go? So I'm leading into it just because we've been talking about the big six. Do you think we can go any further than what we've gone now?
Yeah, like I said, just look at Brighton and look at Brentford this season. It is possible. It's just tricky. Yeah. A lot of things have to go in your favour. You are relying on other teams to have a poor season, to be in transition. I'm sure Liverpool are going to be better this season than they were this season. I'm sure Man United have been good this season, but I don't think they've been great this season. I'm sure they're going to get better. Tottenham, you would think the only way is up. Chelsea, you would think the only way is up. Newcastle show no signs of slowing down. So already that's 5-6 teams outside of the top 2 that you're thinking it's going to be a struggle to finish above them next season. But you never know what happens. All it takes sometimes is an injury to a key player, to Brentford or to another team, and momentum completely flips. It's so hard to predict.
Do you think that it will be possible in the future for a team that's not within the traditional big six? I know Newcastle have done it, but I guess that's part of the question. Is it possible for a team to break into that top 6 without billionaire owners?
It was meant to be Leicester, wasn't it?
It was
like, because Leicester won the FA Cup, it's like, how did they now
Is it possible?
themselves?
Is it possible? Because
it's so hard, and the problem you've seen with Leicester City is that when they won the league title with players they bought for pennies. You know, Kante was 3.5 million. Mahrez cost them, I think, a few 100,000. Yeah. Vardy they got from Fleetwood Town. The second they started buying players like Boubacar Samari, I think they got Cengiz Under from Roma. I'm trying to think of a couple of other players, maybe even Patson Daka and Kelechi Iheanacho for 30, 40, 50 million. They've not quite hit that level. And I think when you're a club outside of the top six spending money on those kind of players, it's very hard to justify that year in, year out if you're not qualifying for the Champions League and kind of getting the financial rewards from that, which is what happened with Leicester. They had to massively slow down their spending. Whereas I think an Arsenal, a Chelsea, a Tottenham, if they spend a couple of seasons outside of the Champions League, outside of the Europa League, they can take that financial hit a little bit more. I just think you've just got such a limited window if you're a Brighton, a Brentford, a Leicester City to kind of get it right. It's quite easy in a sense to spot good value players when they're only 2 million, 3 million, 4 million pound. It's harder when you're spending 20, 30, 40 million pounds because it can quite quickly become obvious that they're not the best return on that investment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's difficult as well because as soon as you start finding those sort of £2-3 million players, you see it with Brighton this season with the amount of players that will get cherry picked. You kind of see it with us. Yeah, we're basically Brighton's kind of little brother in that sense. They've just got a couple
of years behind them really, but their scouting is insane.
So, it's insane. But like they've already lost McAllister. I think they might lose Minamino.
Well, that's what I was
Minamino. Sorry,
Matoma.
That's what I was going to say. I think the success of teams like ourselves and Brighton depend a lot on transfers. It's that kind of constant cycle. We saw it a lot for ourselves in the Championship. We'd have a team that would kind of probably could get to 6th, and then in January we'd make the decision, sell for value, sell no more pay, sell Ollie Watkins, kind of reset. And that's going to start. That's happening to Brighton right now, right? They lost McAllister. They've already got replacements. Caicedo is going to leave as well, most likely. Yeah. So it's like how that cycle of transfers. How does it treat you? Basically, does the guy you bring in to replace McAllister for 4-5 million, or I think they're getting Dahoud from Dortmund. Does he come in and replace him? Or is he better, or does it actually take 2 years to get to that same level as McAllister? Quality player, and in those 2 years when your midfield's not as good, then you kind of drop out into the bottom table. But it's kind of like you said, that like reoccurring cycle, and I think we're still living off that team. Not living off it. It's a great team that we signed in the Championship.
Yeah, the spine of it's very much the same.
It's Wemo, Norgard, Raya, Janssen, all in the same season, right? Janssen. It's crazy. So I think a lot of it, and some of that is luck, right? You can buy the right player, they come in the first day of training and do their ACL, and
you just have to have a succession plan. And the fact that Brentford have already signed Flecken is a sign of that. Brighton have already signed João Pedro, that's a sign of that. These teams that are proactive. I've said this so many times, but I think Brentford signing Kevin Schade in January was another proactive sign, partially to do with Tony, but also because we think this guy is really talented. If he spends another 6 months in Freiburg, we're probably going to have another Mudryk on our hands where the money's going to get too much, he's going to be too well, and we're going to get outbid for him. We get him in 6 months early, he adjusts to the league, and then hopefully next season he actually chips in with more goals and more assists, etc., etc. As long as you're on the ball, but then it's hard to be on the ball.
We've spoken, just quickly about Tony. So his contract, when does it expire?
2025.
So he's going to be back in January 24.
Yeah.
So it's going to give
15
him
months.
Yeah. So how do you foresee that playing out? And like obviously, I think Mike and I have said on the previous podcast, if it wasn't for the whole betting thing, there'd be serious interest right now, right? We'd be looking at him moving on for a lot of money.
I think, we're talking honestly. I think so. 20 Premier League goals. I think he got 4 assists as well. England international.
Yeah.
I think he's earned his right to play in the Europa League, Champions League. Same with David Raya. It's hard to tell because, again, I don't know if he's allowed to sign a new contract while he's banned from all football-related activity because in my mind, I would think that does constitute football-related activity, but nobody knows the answer to it. It's a tricky one because when he comes back in January, his main focus is probably going to be on how can I get into the England squad for the Euros as quickly as possible. So I think that will be his main focus. And if Brentford enter a situation next year where he has only a year left in his contract and he's hit the ground running and he feels like it's his time to move on, I think they'd maybe be. It's probably a little bit bittersweet. Okay, he's only got a year left on his contract. Maybe we're not going to get the money that we would have gotten for a year ago. but then maybe they turn around and say, well, actually, because of the ban, we actually ended up keeping him for an extra 4 or 5 months in football terms than we expected to. So they'd weigh it up, I guess. If he comes back in January and Brentford, avoid relegation again and finish in the top half of the table again, I'm sure they'd feel like it's not the end of the world. But then, I'm sure he would have been, looking at 60, 70, 80 million pounds, maybe 80 is a bit too much, but he is definitely a striker, 20 Premier League. That's a lot of money. Yeah. As I said earlier, Brentford's club record sale at the moment is 30, so you're looking at double that. That sets the club up nicely for the future. So I'm sure it'd be conflicting feelings.
We got a question from CTB saying which B team prospect are the club most excited about. I think with the news that it was Trevor and the Ukraine.
I'm not going to butcher his name.
Yehor Yamolia.
Yeah, they got the promotions.
Yehor, I think is how you're supposed to say.
Promotions to the first team squad. Are those two? Well, I guess they're not B team players anymore, but do we expect them to feature next season?
I think I wouldn't be surprised if Trevor went out on loan. I think he probably needs to. I think he's probably in a similar situation to your Miles Harris, your Paris McGomez, where they're clearly very good players, and if Brentford were still in the Championship, they'd probably maybe make, a bit like Jan Zambiorek and Mads Bidstrup, 6, 7, 8 appearances off the bench. But the step up to the Premier League is just so much higher that it's difficult to see where they go straight from B team to Premier League. Trevor is definitely really highly rated at the club. Every time I speak to Thomas Frank, he kind of raves about him. I know the coaching staff really love his attitude and application. This is a lad who came from Leatherhead's under 18, so he's really been plucked from obscurity in that regard. And I think he approaches every day as, wow, like I'm so fortunate to be in this position. I could have been the other way. I'm sure some of his friends from that Leatherhead under 18s team are now playing non-league football, so he knows how fine the margins are. But I think he probably needs time out on loan, League One, League Two, wherever it is, to develop. I mean, you look at what's happened with Paris Magoma and Miles Harris this year. I think the fact that those two have gone out on loan, they've clearly upped their levels. I'm sure they'll be. I think Paris Magoma probably maybe needs another year out on loan. Whereas I feel like Miles, the fact he was the captain of Forest Green Rovers at the end as well, and I know they got relegated, but I feel like just the actual experience he's accumulated on the pitch and off the pitch might mean like Brentford feel like, do you know what? We're prepared to put him in the cup competitions and maybe a couple of appearances off the bench this season. I still consider those guys kind of B team players. I know they have been officially promoted to the first team, but they've not properly broken into the first team yet. But yeah, I'd say your Trevitz, Pat Harris's, Yehor Yamoliuk, I've only seen a couple of times because he was injured towards the back end of the season. But again, he looks really good. So one to keep an eye on as well.
What about Mads Bidstrup coming back off loan? Had a great season out in Denmark.
It's really hard to predict what's going to happen with that because, he's been absolutely phenomenal. And I get Danish journalists ringing me all the time, asking me what's going on, basically ranting and raving about him. I think there's probably a little bit of space opening up in midfield because you've got Saman Ghoddos who's left, although he never he played in every single position in the world. Thomas Frank really likes Shandon Baptiste, but I think the club will at some point need to make a decision on Shandon. I think he's only got a year left. He's a very good on the ball, but obviously there's question marks over his injury record as well and how often he's available. So do you look at it as, yes, Shandon Baptiste has been quite consistent for us, but is it time we give an opportunity to Mads Bidstrup, who's had an incredible 18 months at Norgesland or however long it is? It's hard to tell. But then at the same time, we're talking about saleable assets with Canos. Bidstrup's at the peak of his price right now. Could we get 5-6 million for him off a Danish club or a German club potentially? Would that be a good deal? Probably. So it's quite hard to tell with that one. I wouldn't be surprised if Bidstrup's one of those where he comes back in pre-season, he sits down with Thomas Frank and Phil Giles and whoever it is, and they see him in a couple of friendly games, or maybe he goes on tour to the States, and then they work out if they're going to keep him around or not.
I'd like to see him next year. I think even when we saw him feature at the start of last year, I thought he was really good.
Yeah, good technical player. And I think Mike and I, in terms of Baptiste, are on the same page.
I love Baptiste. I think
we think he's a great player, but given the scenario, I think if I was in charge of the transfers, I'd probably be looking. Honestly,
I feel like Baptiste should have been given more opportunities towards the end of the season. Whenever he's come on, I think he puts in his shift when he doesn't get sent off. when he gets because he has been sent off.
It's always like a 7 out of 10, but maybe at Premier League level he's not like that. He's not gonna like win you games. Maybe
he's just one of the. I just think he's quality. I think it'd be a shame if he left.
He seems like he's a really good character to have around the club as well, and it's something Thomas Frank spoke about a lot with Saman Ghoddos. Like sometimes you just need those guys who are not happy to be fringe players, but accept that role and don't cause animosity. So maybe that's why Thomas Frank values him so much. Like this guy knows he's not going to start week in, week out, but he's not going to be banging down my door begging me to start.
We've got Inverpire in the GPG asking, are you covering the Bees next season?
Yeah, you're stuck with me for the foreseeable.
And if you are, what is he hoping to be able to cover next year that he hasn't been able to cover this year? Are there any in-depth articles he's been wanting to write for a while about us but just hasn't had the time?
I've been waiting for this question. I've got something special coming this summer. I've been debating whether to reveal it on today's show, but I don't think this project I'm working on, shall we say, is far enough down the road yet for me to reveal it. Like I said earlier, I'm one of those guys who I don't like to talk about stuff until it's out there in the open, in case everything goes wrong and it backfires. But I've got something really, really, really good. It's the biggest thing I've worked on since I've joined the Athletic. So credit to them for kind of putting the resources behind it. So yeah, you probably won't even have to wait too long. That should probably be available. Soon. In July at some point, I think. Towards mid/end of July. So
very
only
mysterious.
Are you going to the States?
I don't think I am going to the States, but that clashes with a family holiday in Cyprus anyways. So my mum and stepdad have a villa in Cyprus, and I've not been since before COVID. So I've kind of promised them for a long time. So of course I'd love to be out there in Atlanta, but I think on this occasion I kind of have to, especially because I basically missed Christmas because I was out in Qatar. I feel like I kind of have to.
Sensible.
Slightly reluctantly.
We've got Aslan asking, do you watch games now purely through journal-wise, or have you started to feel a bit like a supporter?
Why is everyone asking me if I'm not? I'm only joking. What I always tell people is that I've obviously got to be professional when I'm, at the end of the day, it's a job. Like I'm paid to do it. But of course, football's an emotional game. You can't help but get carried away. So I think the one moment that really stands out is when Tony scored that winner against Man City, just because it was so unexpected. I think I've spoken about it before, that felt like such a crazy 2 weeks in the club season, where the Tony allegations come out. Then Zanka scores that really weird own goal. Remember before Nottingham Forest, Brentford's goalkeeper coach Manu Sotelo had like an altercation with Nottingham Forest ground staff, and they both ended up getting, I think it was a touchline ban and a stadium ban, and then got knocked out of the cup by Gillingham. So that goal was like, it just capped off such a crazy week. I couldn't help but celebrate. And I did notice, I think I was the only one in the press box and get some look in that moment. But yeah, that was the main moment that stands out, as where probably supporter/journalist has been a little bit blurred in that moment.
Nice. We've got N5022, N122. Still shout out for the name, mate. Every time he asks a question, I have to read the whole thing up. But yeah, he asked, why does Rico get overlooked, and should Ben Mee get a late shout? I'm assuming it means for England.
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm trying to work on Ben Mee getting into the England squad. I think Rico gets overlooked just because of his end product. And again, I think that's something Thomas Frank has spoken about. I interviewed Rico, I think it was maybe February or March last year, and he was talking about, Thomas Frank really believes I can be one of the top 3 left backs in the league if I start adding more goals and assists to his game. I just think that with Rico, sometimes that end product is lacking. I don't think there's any doubt that I see a lot of people kind of compare him to Aaron Wan-Bissaka, where 1v1 defending ability, they are so good. But obviously Brentford in the Premier League normally have less possession than their opponents, so they're more likely to be defending than attacking, whereas you're going to be playing for an England team who in most of their qualifying games are probably going to be looking at 60% possession. So Southgate will feel like he needs a left back he can really trust to not just play crisp crosses all the time, but also just play intelligent passes in between the lines and things like that. I think that's just an asset of Rico Henry's game that's not quite on a par with your Luke Shaws, your Ben Chilwells. Do I feel like he should have been called up at this point? Yes, 100%. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big Rico Henry fan, especially when there were points where there were 5 right backs and 1 specialist left back.
Even Tyreek Mitchell was in the squad. And I think he's quite a similar player. He's not really great going forward. He's good defender, but I think Rico probably has outperformed him for the whole season and maybe last as well. So it surprised me when he got in, not Rico.
Yeah, and also like Rico Henry's pace is just unbelievable, and the way he does kind of attack the left wing. With Ben Mee, it's just age. It's a sad thing to say. I've obviously publicly admitted he's a far better player than maybe I realised this time a year ago. And I think if he was playing for lots of other countries, even at the age of 33, I think he would get called up. It's just unfortunately the way it's worked out that England have a lot of young centre-backs coming through. Yeah. I've just seen that Levi Colwill today has been called up from the under-21s to go and train with the senior side. So you've got all those players in the way, Mark Guay, and obviously your John Stones, your Harry Maguires, and Southgate will just weigh up, is it worth me investing in Levi Colwill, Mark Guay, who are going to be part of England for the next 5, 10, 15 years, or Ben Mee, who's only going to be around for the next 2 or 3 years at England level. So it's harsh. If he was playing like this 5 years ago, he'd probably be starting for England. But
this is weird because when he came from Burnley, I just didn't think. Obviously, easy to say with hindsight, but the how good he is on the ball in terms of like spraying diags and his composure on the ball. Like there's so many times this season when he's like spun attackers. The one at Chelsea was just ridiculous.
We saw him playing dodgeball, didn't we? So
I
mean, it was like he's just hoofing it up to whoever's up top.
So it's weird, but he's comfortable on the ball. He's obviously great to have in the dressing room. Good leader. It's just a shame that he's quite old. So doesn't. Yeah,
you can for Rico and me. Back to the question, you can understand it. Yeah. It's a shame, but you can understand it.
Yeah, but like you said, I would have liked to see Rico Henry called up.
I think he's deserved it in the last 2 years. 100%. I think first season he probably needed to do a little bit more. But I think now, he deserves at least a call up.
Mm-hmm. We've got it's the last question from the GPG. We've got Dynamite asking about Fosu, the whole Tarek Fosu situation. He said, from a football point of view, he thinks Fosu is promising, even more than some of our players who have done well in the Premier League, which I might agree with. Maybe I think he was really good in the Championship. Do you know about what happened? Heard some fans pointing towards the no dickheads policy at Brentford. Is that fair?
Not massive. I don't think it's fair to say that when there's been no suggestion that's been the case. Clearly, and this is sometimes the brutality of football, coaches just decide that players are not for them anymore. Look at what's happened with Sergi. You could probably say that Sergi and Fosu's situations are very similar, where at one point in the Championship they were, 2 really good Championship wingers, but the step up to the Premier League is an altogether different thing. I think Fosu was obviously really unfortunate in the sense that he was supposed to go on loan to Swansea City in the summer of 2020-21. And maybe if that had gone well, he might have been able to break back into Thomas Frank's plans. But the fact that loan move broke down, then I think he suffered a hamstring injury in training, and it wasn't like a 2-week, 3-week hamstring injury. I think he might have had to have surgery on it. Apologies if that's incorrect. Just lost all momentum and form. And obviously at that point, Brentford were playing so well. And you got to remember, Fosu's naturally a winger, right? Mm-hmm. And at that stage in the season, Brentford didn't play with wingers. Sergi was converted to a right wing back, and that had its pros and it had its cons doing that. And I'm not too sure if Fosu would have worked out in the same way had you tried to do that. So there was no real natural place for him in a side. When Thomas Frank has played 4-3-3, Fosu and Canos, I may as well group them together, we're not going to play ahead of Visser and Mbumo. Mm-hmm. So it becomes harsh, but these are the tricky things that you have to do when you're a Premier League club. Do we stay loyal to the players that brought us up to the Championship, or do we have to be a little bit brutal? And you could probably say the same with Mads Bech Sorensen, for example, who's done a really good shift at the club in the Championship and in the Premier League last season, but it's probably time for him to move on. Sometimes if you show too much loyalty in this game and start handing out contracts to players who maybe aren't at the requisite level you'd like them to be, sometimes that's when you end up in sticky situations. So it's not a nice thing, but I'm glad that Fosu got I think he did make at least one Premier League appearance. At one point I thought, when he wasn't getting named in any matchday squads, I was like, this would feel quite harsh if somebody who did contribute a lot to Brentford getting promoted didn't even get a Premier League appearance. But to be honest, I'm sure to him that doesn't mean anything. He's like, I'd rather have 20, 30 Premier League appearances than one. But
yeah, we'll go on to Twitter then. We've got a couple of questions before we do the end of season awards. We'll ask, what's the best opposition press hospitality?
Yeah, I did see this question.
Stamford Bridge is supposed to be quite legendary.
Stamford Bridge is good. Leicester City on the first day of the season was good. Got like pick and mix and stuff like that.
Oh, nice.
I remember taking 2 cans of Chang beer for the train journey on the way home. Obviously, I'd finished my work first week. I'm always a professional. But I just stashed them in my rucksack, and then the second I've finished work, just on the train, just pop the can. So Man City's is pretty good as well. Arsenal's is pretty good. All those big clubs. Tottenham. Tottenham's is how could I forget? Tottenham's is unbelievable. Yeah, you get like not that I eat cheese boards. That's not really my style. But just the fact that there's a cheese board in a Premier League press box. Like you go to some press boxes and there's barely a meal. So the fact that they've got cheese boards, different ranges of fruit, yogurt, obviously on top of a normal, what I would consider a normal meal as well. Yeah, it's Tottenham's.
You're looking forward to going to Luton next season?
I am, because I've not been to Kenilworth Road before, and obviously like it's been a whole bit of a joke about it on Twitter. But I do think that Griffin Park, had a really special quality about it, and unfortunately a lot of those stadiums they're not modern, they're not really up to scratch anymore. But I'm glad that they get the opportunity to play in the Premier League with that stadium, because it will be a really novel experience, right? Yeah. Everybody knows a Big Six team is losing to Luton at home, and it's going to be
it's a grim place to play.
It's going to be funny. It's going to be entertaining.
You watch it in the playoffs, and like the camera's like pointing like straight down at the player. I mean, I think they've already demolished half that stand. That's the one that has to go because it's got like no seats in it. But no, watching that, it kind of gave me memories of Griffin Park, and kind of. Yeah, glad another team can experience having that, and kind of.
I'm looking forward to it.
Bring in whoever you want. Name your big. I don't know. Bring Haaland and putting him in that tiny little dressing room wherever it is in Kenilworth Road, and kind of the players and the fans have been right on top of you, and you're trying to take a throw and they're hitting it out of your hands. And stuff. It's great.
No, I wish that we could have maybe had that. I know the G-Tech's great and I love it now, but. Especially from when the news broke that we were going to move from Griffin Park to the G-Tech, I wish that we could have had maybe a similar situation to Luton in a world where we could maybe demolish half the stand, redevelop it, and play Premier League football at Griffin Park. Can you imagine?
Yeah, it'd have been crazy.
Oh my god, it would have been. I feel sorry for you that you never got to.
Ever seen a photo of the Griffin Park away dressing room? It's literally
like a box. It's
probably from me to you, Jay. Like, not big. Like every team used to complain about it.
But yeah, no. Eden Road under the lights was something special. We got another question from Chef Big Dog. On Twitter asks, any info on how the club is helping Ivan with his ban, i.e. therapy, fitness, etc.?
Well, at the moment, I think everybody's on holiday because it is the end of the season after all. And like I said earlier, it's quite tricky to know what being banned from all football activity extends to. But from what I understand, Brentford can basically ask for guidance from the FA. Are we allowed to do this? Are we not allowed to do that? So as I mentioned earlier, in terms of rehabbing him from his injury, yeah, they're allowed to be in contact with him and help him with stuff. I don't. If I'm honest, I don't know if that means he's allowed to go to the training ground or not. I honestly don't. If you're banned from training, can you rock up to the training ground? Who knows? I think it very much depends on the situation. What I've kind of repeatedly been told is that ban from football and football-related activity, on a whole, only really relates to him actually playing football and training. So anything in terms of can they give him a nutrition plan and tell him to follow it over the summer? I think they can do that. Can they talk to him and give him emotional support, mental support, counselling? Of course they can. And I think Tony himself has come out and said that he's been really supported by the club throughout the whole process. Thomas Frank gets on really well with him and speaks to him a lot as well. And I know other senior figures at the club do too. So anything they can, they will do to help him out. But specifics is a little bit murky at this point.
Yeah, I think him sat next to Giles at the end of the season, last game, just kind of said it all really.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
That's probably on purpose.
You mentioned it on the Athletic podcast where you said it just didn't seem right, that picture when the picture emerged of him in the tunnel. Yeah, that just seemed wrong. I think you said on the Athletic podcast. It just seemed wrong.
It didn't seem right. Again, it just felt like in that moment he'd been made an example of, and what at the end of the day, yes, he's broken some of the FA's rules, but what the focus should be is on how do we rehabilitate this person who's got a gambling addiction, right? And I don't think preventing him from walking on the pitch and receiving the adulation from the fans and connecting with them in what must have been a really tricky personal and professional moment for not only him but his family don't think that helps in any way whatsoever. I thought that was a really unnecessary thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree. Jamie's got a good question, which would kind of wrap up the questions quite nicely before we get on to the awards. He said, at what point did Brentford fans start to expect a good finish in the league position and decent cup runs rather than happy to survive in the league notion? Or have we already passed that stage? In essence, when did us as fans raise the bar?
That's not really a question I can answer. I saw this on Twitter earlier. I think it obviously just depends on at what point does the magic of playing in the Premier League week in, week out rub off. Mm-hmm. At what point are you looking at, Southampton have been relegated. At what point do you wake up on a Saturday morning and it's Nottingham Forest away and you go, actually, I can't really be bothered about this. Do you know what I mean? Well, it's when that starts. It's when you get used to it a little bit more.
Like a team like Palace, like they basically finished 11th, 12th, 10th, 14th every season. It's like, would you be happy with that?
I would like to compare. I would like to know what Bournemouth fans kind of thought when they become like an established Premier League side after like 3 or 4 years of being in the Prem, and then they started to kind of drift towards the bottom echelons of the table. But it's a good question because it's obviously evolves with every season. But like with the upward trajectory we're on now, and I don't want to sound like too sort of. We get a lot of stick for being like young Brentford fans and who haven't gone through all the shit.
Yeah, it's true though.
Where it's been really, really bad. But with the upward trajectory we're on now, it's like expectations just get higher and higher and higher. But we spoke about it before. It's so different. You have to rely on so many different factors to
take it year by year.
I think as long as I remember thinking about this before, ironically, or maybe not ironically, but to do with Bournemouth and just comparing how Brentford's first season went to Bournemouth. And again, any Bournemouth fans listening, this is no slight on you, this is just an observation, but I think there have been a lot more memorable moments and a lot of times where Brentford have been in the headlines in the last couple of years than other teams that have got promoted. Yeah. Maybe apart from Nottingham Forest, but that's just because they're a bit of a basket case club. Yeah. But the fact that expectations were so low and then Brentford all of a sudden beat Arsenal on the opening day of the season, and then a few weeks later it's that 3-3 draw with Liverpool. Klopp comes out and calls David Raya a number 10.
Yeah.
And then you get a situation where, oh my God, my mind's gone completely blank. Why did it do that? Oh, Christian Eriksen. Like that story was, that wasn't a Premier League story. That wasn't a football story. That was a world story. So I think as long as Brentford still have moments like that, even if you finish 14th, 15th and things don't quite go so well, as long as you have those moments throughout a season where you go to Anfield and you get a point off Liverpool, or you play really well against Liverpool, or you beat Chelsea at Stamford Bridge for the 3rd season in a row, fingers crossed. I think as long as you still get situations like that, I think the vast majority of the fan base will still be happy because I'd still say the vast majority of the fan base are those guys who've been there in the Griffin Park days and the bucket days and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, I mentioned Palace, but like they're kind of notorious for going to the Etihad most seasons and getting something from some sort of screamer last minute.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the stuff you keep going to the games for, isn't it? Not everyone can be a big six club.
Also, the team evolves. There'll be, like you said earlier, the bulk of the team at the moment is still, the team from the Championship that won summer of 2019. And as it evolves and as Schade becomes maybe the main centre forward, as Keane Lewis Potter kicks in a little bit more, you've got new heroes that pop up each season. Last season it was all about Christian Eriksen for 6 months. This season it's all about Tony. This season it's been all about Tony on and off the pitch. Next season it will be someone else. And that always keeps you interested as well.
It'll be interesting to see with the signings we make. Like, I know that you can do a lot. You can get yourself into a lot of trouble doing like pre-season predictions before the season started. But when you look at the squads, and maybe if we're in a position where we've made a few signings and we start comparing our squad with someone who's finished in the top 6 this year with a Brighton or with a Tottenham that finished above us or a Villa, then it gets interesting to see kind of how it weighs up. But it's very much a thing where you just kind of have to take it season by season.
Yeah. Especially if you actually think about next season for Brentford, not having Tony for that first half the season, it's gonna be a big impact.
Yeah, no, it is.
No matter how much someone else steps up, that is your 20-goal striker, right? Your pivotal man, your leader.
I mean, we are yet to be proven that we won't be, but we will be worse off without Tony.
On a very small sample size.
I know, very small sample size, only like 3 or 4 games, but imagine
we played a defeated Spurs and a City that had already won the league, but we did play well. There was some very positive signs.
Yeah, no, and Bumo stepped up. We mentioned it. I think that Spurs, it's going to come up in the season awards. Let's just get on with it because we're already talking about sort of moments in the season. I've just realised that I'm filming on my phone and mine are actually on my phone, so I don't have it, but I can remember. So player, you got yours up?
Player of the season.
Did you do some? Did you have?
Yeah, I think I know most of this off the top of my head. Cool, I did an article on it anyway. So
okay, cool. So I got player of the season. I think. it's unanimous, is it? Is it not? I've gone with Ivan Toney play this season.
Yeah.
No, I said Matthias Jensen.
Is it? Oh yeah. I do remember that actually. So, he was in my honourable mentions, but I feel like you can't overlook Toney. You got to put your case forward now.
To be honest, it was at the end of a week where I'd written about 10,000 words on Ivan Toney. So part of me was a bit like, I can't do it again. I mean, obviously Toney is definitely up there. He had a phenomenal season. Ben Mee as well. I think in that moment I went for Matthias Jensen because he really surprised me this year. I think his development and his evolution has been phenomenal. This time a year ago, everybody was talking about how are Brentford going to cope without Eriksen if he leaves, inside and outside of the club, in terms of fans. Brentford have to sign a replacement. Who are Brentford going to get? Then people started talking about Damsgaard being the replacement. But I think most people who were switched on, no offence, knew that Damsgaard was never a like-for-like replacement for Eriksen. No. And so I've written it before, that second game of the season where Jensen scores after he takes the ball off Eriksen really felt like a significant moment. It felt like the moment where he'd kind of arrived, and I think from that point onwards he's been brilliant. So considering how much of an impact losing Eriksen could have had, because there's no doubt he did really raise the team to another level. I think the fact that Jensen actually managed to kind of match that impact, considering what he had been producing previously, is phenomenal. So he truly deserves a special mention for that.
Yeah, he was in my honourable mentions for a reason. I just think, because I think a lot of Brentford fans have written him off a little bit. And I think he was very much a player that on his day you could see the quality.
But he just couldn't produce
it. Championship, especially towards the back end. Like, there were moments, that pass against Swansea in the playoff semi-final, that's just still one of the best assists I've ever seen for Ollie Watkins. And there's moments where I think he may have tried to be a bit too much of that, but now it's kind of suddenly starting to click. Yeah, and some performances, especially towards the start of the season, he's been unreal.
Yeah, ball playing ability has always been there, more consistent this season. Also, kind of, I think last season bulked up a lot more and kind of winning that ball a lot more. So he's kind of just more rounded 8 as opposed to being maybe a bit more of a 10.
Yeah.
No, definitely understand that argument. I think just for me, it'd be Toney, because I think if you had to lose one player, if you had no Toney at the start of the season, no Jensen at the start of the season, we'd be better off if we had no Jensen. That'd be my argument.
That's fair.
What about you, Mike?
I went with Toney. I think he's just been the levels this guy's gone to this season has just been crazy. It's just such a shame that the whole FA betting allegations has happened during this, because I think honestly, if you take that away, I think he scores more goals. I think he goes to the World Cup, and I think honestly, I think he's England's next in line when Harry Kane sort of passes the peak of his powers, because I think he's that good.
He would have scored that second penalty.
He would. 100%. But yeah, no, I don't think he can pass it. I've got Jensen as most improved player. Who do you say most improved?
It feels like cheating to say Jensen again, but I can't force an answer on it. Do you know what I mean? I quickly wrapped my brain. I was like, no, just go with the.
Well, I'll go with a new. Actually, no, I won't. I'll go a player that doesn't perhaps get the recognition they deserve. I remember I had a few for this. I had Rico Henry, Ethan Pinnock, I think Ben Mee as well. Ethan Pinnock, first of all, we had a conversation about whether he might have been the best centre back we've ever seen play for the club, and I don't think that's that crazy to say that. He's been fantastic all season, and in terms of what this category is, a player that doesn't get the recognition they deserve, I think he's number one.
I'll throw a bit of a curveball, because I think all those players get the recognition they deserve within the Brentford fan base. Yeah. So I'll maybe say Zanka, because even last year, if you remember, there were a couple of times where at the start of the season, Zanka was playing and he was doing well. And then from January onwards, he just had this persistent, I think it was a hamstring injury or something just behind. I remember Thomas Frank explaining it once, and he was like, it's behind his knee, but it's not his knee. I was so confused. And when the club offered him a new contract last summer, I was a little bit sceptical, because there's a really small sample size that he played for Brentford. I think he was at Copenhagen before. No, he wasn't at Copenhagen. He'd been at Fenerbahce in Turkey, hadn't he? So I just felt like, is this guy on the decline in his career? And again, I know he didn't play a lot this season, but when he does play, it always tends to be against your Liverpools, your Man Cities. He steps in a lot of the time for Pontus Jansson or Christopher Ajer. Obviously, Pontus is that leadership, and I think Zanka fills that void very well. Chris Ajer's the quick, pacey, modern-day centre-back, and Zanka plays very differently to him. But I still think he does a job. So I think in terms of a player who doesn't get the recognition they deserve within the fan base, I'd maybe say Zanka.
If we're
talking the rest of the league, of course, it's Pinnock and Henry without a doubt.
Yeah, I had Rico as mine. But just going back to Zanka, and even just that back three, to be fair, you speak about him coming in big games. I remember Chelsea away this season, he came in, I think he hadn't played in quite a good stretch of games. He came and started, kept a clean sheet against Chelsea. Obviously not the first time he's done it. I remember just watching that game when obviously Chelsea had a bad season, played them off the park kind of that day. Maybe not with possession, but they never really liked scoring. And kind of just look at that back three of Ben Mee, kind of had the career he has had, like you said, at the start of the season. We didn't expect too much from him playing. Sean Dyche is kind of solid, all kind of the wrong side of 30 as a footballer goes. Pinnock was playing non-league in the same decade, and Zanka as well. Almost, obviously, it's an individual performance, but a testament to the coaching staff to have that kind of, those are your back three centre-backs. It's so impressive. Like, when you take a step away from it and look away from the form on paper, that shouldn't really be in the Premier League. I think at most clubs, you would never see that back three play so well together.
Yeah.
And then you add in someone like Zanka that comes in on a kind of game's notice. It's just incredible.
It's a credit to the recruitment team as well, because those 3 players cost $3 million altogether, which is just absurd. And I think there was a stat on Opta, which is, I think they're the best partnership in the Premier League in terms of the amount of goals they concede per 90. Again, obviously, I think they've only started 7 or so games together. But yeah, as you said, the fact that those 3 players have managed to kind of counteract their strengths and weaknesses. Because way at the start of the season when Thomas Frank tried that, I remember he started Ben Mee as the middle centre-back. And I can't remember what game it was, but he got burned for pace a couple of times.
Yeah, I remember
that. And then I remember got burned by Broher like a couple of times in the first half.
What in the 0-0 game?
In the 0-0 game.
Maybe
I
it's
remember that. And then I was thinking for the season, oh my god, he's quite slow.
He's not the quickest.
Maybe I did say earlier, I can't remember that game. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's that. And it might have been at half time, or maybe it was just in the next game where Frank switched them. So Pinnock was the deepest line, and I think that in itself was quite like a smart move to make, to say, you know, Ben Mee will probably be slightly higher up as he's outside on the wings, and just let Ethan be the one who's the quickest and track him back.
One to watch next season. Who are you gone for?
I went for Brian.
Brian Abumo?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's becoming a bit more of a household name, but I think without Tony, he's just got that. I mean, he scored the other night for Cameroon's first international goal. I think we saw glimpses from the Tottenham game and against City. Albeit the funny kind of moment where he tried to score, went off the back of his head and assisted Pinnock, pretended like he meant it. But that's kind of just a player he is. He's always in the right position. I think. I wrote down Brian without Tony, so him kind of being that
the main man.
Yeah.
One to watch.
What about you, Jay?
I'll probably just say Keane Lewis-Potter.
Yeah.
Because obviously it was announced today that Kevin Schade joined the club permanently. I mean, that was always gonna happen. But until then, Keane Lewis-Potter was a club record signing, so still the second biggest transfer fee the club have ever paid for a player, and we've just hardly seen any of him. I think he got 1 goal in the Carabao Cup, and then I think he nutmegged Nathan Collins, and that's all we've really seen. Obviously, he was performing to a really good level for Hull City, for a struggling Hull City in the Championship. But it's always struck me as quite a small player. So I think this pre-season will be all about getting him back to full fitness, bulking him up. I think he works quite a lot with like Justin Cochrane in terms of his finishing and his movements in attacking areas and things like that. So what I really hope is that pre-season comes around, he's fit from day one, he goes to the States, get some games, and then just kind of hits the ground running for next season. That's what I would really like to see.
Yeah, exciting.
100%. I've liked Keane Lewis-Potter even when he we haven't seen much of him, like you said, but even when he's played, I think.
I only have a couple of memories from this season. I remember him coming off the bench, I think in August against Fulham, looked pretty positive. A couple of chances.
Came off the bench or maybe started against Forest away, but I remember
he started against Forest,
really good against Forest
because Tony was out, and he actually really struggled in that game. But he wasn't the only player.
I thought he was good in that game. I remember him being like one of the better players. Maybe
who knows?
we watch different games sometimes. I went with Damsgaard to be one to watch next season.
Yeah, that's
I think
not a bad chat as well.
Towards the end, people giving him stick when we kind of signed him because he's that big name. Everyone was kind of focusing on that campaign with Denmark at the Euros. But I think especially towards the last 5 or 6 games, there's been moments in each game where I think he's come up with.
Well, it was the Fulham game in March that was the first game where I felt like I can see it.
Yeah.
And then there were a couple of other games towards the end of the season, like you said, where you saw more flashes of it. So it's been very, very streaky. One minute it's been decent, 1 minute it's been a bit below par.
I think the same can be said about Lewis Potter though. Get him fully fit at the start of the season.
Yeah, beef him up
full
a bit.
Pre-season in him.
A bit bigger. It's too slight for me still.
Yeah, no, but I think he should come good next year. Moment of the season. I think this is probably going to be unanimous. I've gone City away. Maybe there's two. I've gone City away just because.
No, it was definitely that. Yeah, we were all there.
I still say Man United.
Okay.
I just think because, as I said earlier, that just felt like the perfect football afternoon for me. 5:30. It was baking hot. It was Man United's second game under Ten Hag. They lost to Brighton on the opening day of the season, and you just felt like they're going to come out with a vengeance. And my cousin's a big Man United fan, and I'll draw him out. But when Brentford lost to Man United, and in January last year, and Thomas Frank came out and said we battered them, my cousin was giving it all big. So what was Thomas Frank saying? Yeah. And I said, come on, his name's Jordan. I said, come on, Jordan, Brentford should have won that game. And so then when Brentford lost to Old Trafford in May, I was like, God, I thought they were better than this. So that game, I was messaging him when it was the 4-0. I was like, I told you. I told you this Brentford team had it. But I just remember there being a moment in that first half where like Ten Hag was just stood with his hands on his hips. I think he was in a suit as well. Sun was roasting. And I was just like, this guy just looks like, what have I signed myself up for?
To be fair to me, he did turn it around after that.
Yeah, but then it was, Lisandro Martinez gets taken off at half time, and obviously he's been a really good player this season. But there was a lot of jokes about his height and things like that. Hickey bodies Ronaldo in the second half. There were just so many moments in that game that just felt like this is really true. 4-0 after 34 minutes. I was just like, that is one of the best games I've ever seen, because it was just, I could not believe what was happening before my eyes.
It was when Jensen took it off Eriksen as well, like you said, it's just like, it was so, like, it's just perfect. Like the guy that left us left to join back to a European club, and then kind of his protege just takes it off.
You should have stayed at the big club. Couldn't write it. I remember going to the press conference. The press conference after the United game, and I asked Thomas Frank, where does that rank in terms of like best results, and he was like, I don't even know if it gets in the top 5, because he said obviously the Wembley one's number 1, then the Bournemouth second leg in the Championship at home, and
Arsenal.
He said Arsenal as well, and he was like, I don't even think it gets in the top 5, and I was just thinking, okay,
no, we've been spoiled.
Yeah. We'll go on to. Should we talk a little? Well, we've spoken about City so many, so there's not really much to say. I think that's just like
I've never left a game, bar maybe it was a different feeling from that playoff final. I've never left the game feeling like that before. Just got completely bemused to the situation. Like, it felt surreal that we won the playoff final. We're in the Premier League, but we were the favourites going into that game.
Yeah,
realistically.
we were. Yeah.
We were the better team, and we did win it. So it's like, it was kind of, obviously we're nervous that we had the playoff curse, whatever. But like, we had just lost to Gillingham. They were bottom of League 2. We had just lost them. I'd been to the game at the G-Tech on the Tuesday night. I've somehow stupidly got up at like 5 a.m. to drive up to Manchester. I'm sat there like, why am I here for the 12:30 kickoff? And we end up beating what is now the treble winning, one of the best teams we've ever seen in world football.
Yeah.
What was that?
Very, very, very well summed up. I think I can't really say much more. I remember saying to my girlfriend, because I wasn't actually going to go to the City game. I was thinking this might be a good one to miss. I was already in Leeds. I remember saying to her, like, if we go, we're not going to see Brentford win. Like, it's 1 in a million. You go to City and watch it win, and then to get to win in the fashion that we did, like, that's peak. I think I've never celebrated a goal so much as I did that one.
It was just like hysteria, like
carnage.
Because I said afterwards, a bar like something maybe qualifying for Europe probably wouldn't even feel that great. It's bar like that moment you see the West Ham fans have winning that trophy.
Yeah.
It's just complete hysteria. It's just like, it doesn't add up. You're like, how will this little team that I followed beat Man City in the last minute? And then obviously add on all the Ivan Toney stuff. Yeah. Literally straight after didn't get in the squad. It was just insane.
Goal of the season for you, Jay?
I think it has to be Tony's chip against Leeds.
My man. No, same for me.
That was just, again, it was one of those moments where the whole stadium felt that anticipation at the same time. It's like everyone was up on their feet, like,
silence.
How is this ball going in the back of the net? And there's something really, really special about those shared experiences where everyone's just on the edge of their seat thinking, how is he going to score this goal? It was just such a clutch performance, and I think it was a week after that he finally got called up to England for the first time. That really felt like a performance that was like, you cannot ignore me any longer. Do you know what I mean? The penalty, the free kick and that chip, that they were just sublime.
A little celebration after the
change. Yeah, exactly.
What about you?
It was the same.
Same.
Yeah, no, on the same page.
I went for his free kick in that game, or Mbeumo's fourth goal against United.
Didn't that win goal of the season?
Yeah,
from the club.
From the club.
Yeah.
I just think that
on the counter
pass. And I was looking at the goal again the other day, and I was thinking, why have we never mentioned that pass on the podcast? Because I don't remember us giving it that much clout.
Tony's pass.
Tony's pass with his left foot on the half volley on a plate, like couldn't have. It was perfect pass. It was a perfect pass. So yeah, I think in terms of his system finish, I think I'll go for that one.
I'll do Visser's goal against Nottingham Forest just for the celebration.
That was one of the best limbs all season, like right in front of their way, and just kind of we weren't playing well at all. And then
it came out of nowhere.
One ball over top, one touch finish, just right in front of the way.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was
unbelievable. Did he have pitchforks? I don't remember that.
He did. Yeah, he did. I didn't know it was a pitch. Is that what it was
I never knew that.
Yeah, it's on. We'll show you after.
I remember the celebration, but I didn't realise it was in reference to what happened before the game. Like, can you imagine the team talk that happened before that game?
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
I guess we've kind of already covered favourite home and away. Obviously, I'd say home Man United, away City.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. You can't look.
And favourite article you've written this year. So I actually, the one that I've read all of your articles this year pretty much. I think your best one I actually think was the one where you interviewed Stephen Corker and got loads of people to talk about the whole thing.
Yeah,
it was comprehensive. I saw it got a lot of traction on Twitter as well.
Yeah, in terms of non-Brentford stuff, that's definitely the hardest article I've ever written, because you're reaching out and asking people to open up on a really difficult topic in gambling. And I said to Stephen, thank you so many times throughout our Zoom, because I was a complete stranger to him. He didn't have to open up in that way. So in terms of like non-Brentford stuff, that was definitely up there. To be honest, I really liked the piece I wrote on Ivan Toney's journey to getting called up by England and his first cap with England. Like, this is a player who had been rejected so many times during his career. I think he got released by Leicester City's academy when he was 14. Obviously then he then saves Northampton from getting relegated, I think, down to non-league with like a bicycle kick.
He was like 18, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was so young, and I really enjoyed finding out the different parts of his story. I'm getting into the psyche of him a little bit, so I like that one as well.
Clayton, did you have one in particular?
Yeah, I think I was going to go for the Stephen Corker one. I thought,
I think it was really good.
I think, obviously that's kind of Brentford aside, but kind of an important issue, and it was covered in the right way.
Thank you guys, appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I think that was a good way to end it. I don't know how long we've been going on for, to be fair.
That's fine.
I think it's been quite a while. But yeah, the Eden Road podcast will be back soon. We're just in the process of finalising the live episode that we want to do at the Griffin. I need to message Claire about that. And also, we are recording an episode with two special guests next Wednesday. So keep your eyes peeled on our socials for that. Follow at the Eden Road on Twitter. Subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. And we shall see you soon. Jamie, thank you for your time, mate.
Absolute pleasure, guys.
Sweet.
See you next time.
Lovely. Nice one, guys.